Today's video is all about gardening in the high heat. Now, throughout the years on this channel, I've had many viewers ask me, how do you get your plants to survive and thrive in the super dry, intense heat you must have there in Northern California, Zone 9B? In fact, just recently, Gina commented asking me, could I please do a video how to grow plants in high heat? Now, some people, when they say high heat, they mean 90s Fahrenheit, maybe breaking into the low hundreds. But here we are in the second week of June, and it has reached 102, 104, and today 107 Fahrenheit. And we're just getting started because July and August are definitely the hottest months of the year for us here. So yes, I'm going to do a little video here. I think I'm not an expert in dozens and hundreds of things, but there are a few things I'm an expert in based on my life experience and living and dealing and gardening in the high heat. Well, that's one of them. So today I'm going to share with you 7 things I do to deal with growing in dry, intense, high heat. At the end, I'm also going to share 3 myths I feel like people believe that really are not true. And they definitely directly affect gardening in the heat. So I'm going to share those with you at the end. But first, the 7 things I do, and I'm sure there are more. Other people might do things a little differently, but these have definitely worked for me here in Northern California in my gardens, whether flowers, herbs, annual and perennial veggies, even my fruit trees. Hi, I'm Kim. If you haven't been to my channel before, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, well, welcome back. Now, the first thing I do to help my plants grow despite whatever heat might come is to water a lot. Now, I know this seems really obvious, but I caution you to think very hard about it because what the definition of a lot is can vary from person to person quite a bit. Also, what high heat is, of course. So if you are talking 90 degrees high heat, that's very different from 105 degrees high heat. If you're actually in extremely high heat, you need to water so much more than you think you do. Just, using your little hand wand watering tool for 30 seconds, even a whole minute may not be enough, probably isn't. Like you, your plants get very thirsty when it's this hot and they almost can't keep up. So you need to water them so much more than you have been, even perhaps twice a day. Now, how you water, that's up to you. Hand watering, drip line, soaker hoses, Oyas. There's lots of different ways, but however it is, you better be monitoring it because even the best system, even a really good drip line system, could have major issues if something... Well, that's pretty ironic. My camera just turned off with a message saying the camera can't function in this high of heat. Anyway, as I was saying, whatever system of watering you're using, you need to make sure you're monitoring it because if you're not there to oversee it, something could arise, a break in the system that could kill one of your plants in high heat very, very quickly. Right now, I use a mixture of watering methods. Probably 2/3 of my plants I hand water simply because I enjoy it so much, as well as it provides me the chance to keep a close eye on all my plants. I also use drip line and some soaker hoses, and then out in my olive orchards, I use a sprinkler system. But when it comes to watering a lot more than you think is necessary probably, well, both frequency and depth of watering are important. You need to be watering more often, most likely, in this kind of extreme heat, and you need to be watering more deeply, which basically means for a longer period of time. Now, this is helpful for established plants. Not so helpful, though, this deep watering thing for brand new plants that don't have established root systems. And so frequency of watering, as well as the length of watering, is very, very important. The second thing to do with watering is when you do it, either early in the morning or in the evening. Now, are there problems with the evening? Yeah, a few in some areas, especially if you have humidity, because you can cause some powdery mildew, for instance. I've not experienced that issue. I don't have any humidity at all 98% of the time. To tell you the truth, even if I did experience a little bit of that humidity and powdery mildew resulting, I wouldn't really care because that's simply cosmetic most of the time and doesn't really affect the plant or its fruiting. However, early in the morning is the ideal time because the soil has a chance to really soak in that water without the sun's intense heat, which will happen later in the day, evaporating it almost immediately. It gives it a chance for that water to soak down into the roots. So I do a combination. I get up early in the morning, which is by far the coolest part of the day, so I can actually enjoy being outside, and I water all my new seedlings, anything I've direct sown, and anything I think needs watering twice a day for whatever reason. I water them then. It's pretty quick, even though I have a big garden, because I'm not watering everything. And then in the evening, after the sun has gone down enough that it's not shining on my garden, I water. This is usually between 7 and 8:30, even 9. Somewhere in there, I do a thorough watering of the whole veggie garden. This has worked out amazing for my garden, and I haven't had any issues with anything dying off over the last few years as long as I hold to this schedule. And that brings me to part 3 of watering that's super important, and that is to stick to a schedule. Plants seem to have a memory for these things, and so they know, their roots know when to expect that water. Kind of like your pets, they know when you feed them and give them fresh water, and they depend on that. Well, the plants do too, and so if you get into your schedule of watering at pretty much the same time every day, and the same plants get it that need it twice a day, the plants really benefit from it. Now, the little bonus would be oyas. Oyas do come in very handy, especially in containers, which we'll talk about a little later. If you're going to put an oya in a bed, you really need to do it before you plant the bed up because you don't want to disturb any roots of plants. And to be effective in a bed, you're going to have to use a really big oya. So I actually don't use oyas in beds. I haven't found it to be necessary, and I don't know that it would be that effective. Not saying it couldn't be, especially in a smaller bed, but most of my beds are large, and hand watering and the soaker hoses and drip lines I use have proved to be just really efficient and effective. However, I do use oyas in some of my really thirsty pots and in some of my grow bags because grow bags dry out really, really quickly. And yet I want to use them because I was gifted some a few years ago, and I found that the only way I can is to use some oyas in them to provide just that supplemental water held there for when it really needs it, soaking into the, innermost parts of that soil in the bag. But then remember, with grow bags and any container that's not large, it's going to dry out a lot faster than a bed. But as far as containers go, we'll get to more about them later because they are kind of a special case. Now let's move on to the second thing I recommend you do if you are trying to garden in very high heat. One of the things you're going to hear from everyone who gardens in high heat is that you must use shade cloth. Well, I disagree. Should you use shade cloth? Is shade cloth effective? Does it really work to help your plants in a high heat situation? Yes, it does. And shade cloth can be very, very beneficial, but I don't use it at all and my plants are still doing just fine. How is that? Well, what your plants need is shade, but you can give them shade without using shade cloth. Now, I have used shade cloth in the past. My dad, who is a former landscaper and nursery owner, uses shade cloth extensively, so I know how it works. The thing is, it makes me feel a bit claustrophobic, and I just don't really like the aesthetics of it. So I looked for other ways of providing shade to plants that really could use it, especially in the afternoon where the sun is at its most intense. And really, there are a lot of ways you can give your plants shade without using shade cloth. So if you want to use shade cloth, if you want to build structures for it, go right ahead. It will help your plants. However, you can provide shade for your plants in other ways too, such as structures you already have on your property, such as my chicken coop or my carport storage shed over there, or your house, or maybe fence or trellises, which provide filtered sun. And just a table umbrella can provide some needed shade for several container plants or a small bed. One of the ways I provide shade to several of my beds is through putting container fruit trees nearby, or maybe tall berry bushes growing. Perhaps something like a fast-growing lemon verbena plant that can get quite large. One of the traditional plants a lot of gardeners use to provide shade in their gardens, and it can also provide a structure for vine plants to grow up, is sunflowers. Now, they provide a lot of beauty, of course, but they also can get really big and give a lot of necessary shade to your other veggies and fruits in your garden. Watch the course of the sun over your garden. See which areas of your garden are in shade at what times of the day. The most important thing to note is where is their afternoon shade, because when the sun is at its hottest, you want your plants that need a break to be in that area where they're going to get some afternoon shade. Do you have any large shade trees on your property like the ones just behind me right now? No, not this loquat, but I've got those huge mulberries behind me, and they do provide shade in my garden for about half my garden anyway, from 2 p.m. onward. And this has been great for those plants that really don't want to be in the sun from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So if you want to use shade cloth, go right ahead. It does work well. But if, like me, you're not really a fan of the aesthetics, or it just seems like too much work, or you just physically can't put it up or don't have the money to afford it, well then just look for some of these methods I've discussed here because they work just as well. Now, the third thing that really helps my garden thrive in the high heat is mulch. Now, if you're in an area that isn't this extreme heat, 2 inches of mulch is fine. But if you are in high heat like me, 3 to 4 inches is what you need. And a lighter color shade is more beneficial than a dark shade of mulch. I like to use spent straw or perhaps light colored wood chips, but almost anything can be a good mulch. Just keep it organic so you're not leaching any kind of chemicals into your beds. Now, there's 3 main benefits to mulch. One is that after you water, there's far less water evaporation occurring off of the soil surface immediately because the mulch is covering the soil surface. The second benefit is that it keeps the temperature of the soil much cooler, which is really good for your plants. And the third thing is that it retains the water down deep where the roots are for a far longer time than if there was no mulch. Now, the fourth thing that I practice to help my plants in the high heat to continue to grow well and thrive is I do not fertilize at all other than with compost tea. Why do I not fertilize? Because the last thing my plants need, or your plants need, is to be sending out new, fresh, tender growth that gets hit immediately with blasts of intensive sun rays that basically burn them to a crisp. And meanwhile, this new growth happening is draining the plant of all its energy and taking up all its water resources. So no, you don't want that happening at all. You want all the water going to keeping this plant alive and maybe helping it continue to develop its fruit. Not going to new growth that's just going to be burned up anyway. So the fifth thing I do to help my plants during the hot summer is I don't do any pruning. Very few exceptions to this rule, maybe if something was extremely diseased. But otherwise, I do not prune anything. If something looks a little yellow, a little crispy, I am leaving it. Why is that? Well, because that growth, even if it's not super healthy, even if it's not fruiting or producing anything at all, it is providing shade to the plant. And if you take it off, you're exposing the leaves, the fruits, the trunk, the soil to all that intense sun and heat, which is just going to dry everything out and drain it of all its water resources. So just leave everything on the plant until your heat wave is over, even if your heat wave lasts a month or two, like it does here. The sixth thing I do to combat the high heat effects in my garden is to practice no weeding during this time period of intense heat. No weeding. Why? Because if you are weeding and you're pulling out weeds here and weeds there, you're turning up the soil and exposing the moisture underneath and drying it out. Really, there's no need to do that. If you do have an issue with weeds and you really don't want them, sucking up the water under the ground, that's understandable. Cut them off at soil level, but don't disturb the soil, because not only is that bothering the life that's under the soil and feeding your plant, but it is drying it out. So no weeding other than clipping it off right at soil level. That is something I do and I feel it's really helped. Now, the seventh thing I do is a little different, but containers are one way you can help manage the high heat of summer. And why is that? Well, the main reason is because you can move containers. So if you see a plant that's in a container and it's starting to really struggle in the high heat, even though you've started watering it twice a day, Maybe you didn't pick the most heat tolerant variety of plant. Sort of your fault, right? I know I've done that. But in any case, you can usually save the plant and help it to thrive again by moving it. Pick it up and put it somewhere where it's in semi-shade. Let it recover. Maybe even it needs to go in full shade for a little bit. Usually you can move it back out where it's getting half-day sun. But that ability to move the plant when necessary really alters the course of success or no success when it comes to that plant in high heat. Another thing you can do, as I briefly alluded to before with a container, is you can put oyas in those containers very easily, even after you've planted something if it's not too big yet. And I found this really helps, especially in grow bags, because grow bags do dry out so quickly. I now put in my large grow bags 2 oyas, one on each side, and this has really helped things like tomato plants to grow super well in my grow bags despite the high heat here. And I'm only watering those bags once a day and watering those oyas, and then they're great throughout the entire day. So I know this works because in the past when I've tried to do grow bags without the oyas, it did not work. Containers also can help with those borderline plants that you've been told don't really do well in high heat. Well, in a container they might, because you can move them, maybe to a patio that's covered, or maybe to an area, say, by a structure you have on your property that gets shade from the afternoon on. It's something to consider anyway, and I found it to be a great supplement to my in-ground and raised bed gardens. All right, time for 3 myths that I want to bust right now to help you out as you try to garden in high heat situations. Number 1, black pots. They do not dry out and heat up your plants faster than any other kind of pot. I know, I grow a lot of containers as well as in the ground, and almost all of those containers are black, and my plants do just fine in them. And think about it for a minute. Nurseries everywhere grow in black pots. That's basically all they grow in, and their plants do fine, all of them. So, I think if that was a real issue, not only would I have had a problem, but some of those nurseries would have. Second myth I'm going to bust right here is overwatering. Now, this is one that really a lot of people have a hard time believing. We have heard so much from so many people, don't overwater. If you see yellow leaves, it's because you're overwatering. If your plant's dying, it's because you're overwatering. No. If your plant dies from too much water, it's 99% likely you don't have good drainage. Whether it's in the soil where you planted or more than likely in a container that you forgot to put good drainage holes in. And a few small holes is generally not enough. So overwatering takes weeks, months more to damage a plant at all. And it's slow damage, so you'll see it coming on and you can deal with it. Underwatering, however, can kill a plant in one day. You have some plants that if they dry out 2 hours later, they're dead and you can't bring them back. So as long as you have good drainage, you can't overwater, so stop worrying about it. Once I stopped worrying about this, I cannot tell you how much better my citrus did, for instance. My citrus trees, I was always worried about them because, yellow leaves, I'm overwatering. I must be overwatering. I'm watering so much. No. I finally found some really good advice from experienced desert growers who grow citrus, and I learned, water them more. You're not overwatering, you're underwatering. And once I did that, my citrus took off. And now I have hardly any problems ever with them. So take it from me and a lot of people who grow in high heat, it is almost impossible to overwater unless you don't have good drainage. So make sure you test for drainage. Make sure all your containers have good drainage holes. And the last myth I want to bring to your attention is the myth of deep watering. Now, wait. I'm not saying deep watering doesn't work. I know it does. I use deep watering on all my fruit trees and nut trees. I use deep watering on all my established plants. However, if you have a new plant, a young plant, a newly transplanted plant, these plants' roots are in a very limited, restricted area. And you can dig a big basin and you can water it for hours and it's going to go really deep into the ground. But those roots that are in that central little location, they can't reach all that water. They can't take advantage of all that extended water you put into the ground. So unless your plant is established with a really, far-reaching established root system, the deep watering doesn't really help at all. Now, if you've got an established plant or tree, yes, deep watering works great. But if you don't, you need to water more frequently. Now to end with, I'm going to put a list up here and I'll include it in the description below of the veggies, the herbs, the fruits, and the flowers that I have found here in my Zone 9B hot valley summer weather. They thrive as long as you're watering them well, not pruning, not fertilizing, giving them some shade here and there if they really need it, everything we discussed previously. I'll also mark those that need maybe a little extra attention, a little extra shade, a little extra watering. But I want you to succeed, so I just want to give you this list. You've probably seen them before, but in case not, you'll have it for, your reference. I hope that helps all of you folks who are wondering about how to better grow in high heat. Really, the thing that's going to help you the most, in addition to watering a lot, is experience, because you not only are in a high heat climate, but you are in a little microclimate wherever you live, wherever you're growing. Even on your own little property, there will be different microclimates in different little areas of it. And so you can find what grows best in each little area, each little microclimate, just by observing the weather, observing the shade, and observing how your plants do. And then changing things up, maybe season to season, what you grow in the spring, summer, fall, even winter, and from year to year. And that's certainly how I've learned to deal with the high summer heat, and I know you can too. So, happy gardening.